Good evening. Get everything settled up here. There's lots of stuff. I'm excited to be here tonight, share some thoughts from the scriptures and spend some time in God's Word. Always thankful to the elders who in their wisdom provide this kind of opportunity for individuals to grow in this capacity of preaching live to the congregation. It's a blessing. In the high school class, we just talked about the story in Exodus where Moses keeps giving excuses why he doesn't want to speak in front of the children of Israel or in front of Pharaoh, and God accepts no excuses. So taking that to heart, here we are. I'm going to pretend that this is part of what we did last week when Stephen spoke. Where they're taking the extra Sunday every month and giving an opportunity to the young men to speak. So I'm glad to be here. I appreciate Stephen and GW from this morning. And I just wanted to take a moment to reassure everyone that our regular evangelists will be back soon. And also, finally, to thank everyone for their attendance tonight and giving me your attention for a few minutes. This morning, TJ spoke in class about the armor of God. And GW spoke about fighting inner battles. Tonight, I plan to spend some time in 1 Samuel 17, if you want to turn over to that, seeing some of the things that we can learn from fighting giants. Tonight, we'll talk about the 7 truths to remember about fighting giants, and we'll be all through 1 Samuel chapter 17 there. Can you remember the first time you heard the story of David and Goliath? How exciting it was. Maybe we've heard the story so many times that it's lost its punch. To appreciate this lesson, I want us to pretend that we're hearing this story for the first time. We can do that. We'll spend time this evening looking at one of the most amazing adventures stories told in the Bible. As 1 Samuel 17 begins, the Israelites are at war. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle there in verse 1. The Philistines were a constant thorn in the side of the Israelites. They had their origins in the islands around the Mediterranean, and now they had made their way from the coastlines up into the promised land and were fighting with the Israelites. Verses 1 through 3 set the scene. King Saul and his army lined up on one mountain while the Philistines amassed themselves on the opposite mountain, between the valley of Elah. Every morning, each army would put on its armor, and each gave a great war cry, we're told in verses 20 and 21. The two armies hurled insults back and forth. And this particular valley, we know exactly where it is. You can go there today. It makes a great natural amphitheater, so it was a great place for hurling insults at the enemy. But no one made the first move. Finally, from among the Philistines came a great giant, a massive, towering presence. Verse 4 says, Then a champion came out from the armies of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. That's approximately 9.5 feet tall. Assuming Goliath was proportioned, as most men are, he could have weighed 600 to 700 pounds. And this is not like the 500 to 600 pounds people you might see today. It was 600 pounds of carefully honed soldier muscle, a professional at killing people and breaking things. He had been a soldier from his youth, we're told in verse 33. He was a battle-hardened veteran. He was clothed in his full armor, including his helmet, his scale armor, and remember they're from island origins people, so they had an affinity for fish They had fish gods, they had fish iconography on everything. Their armor was made of scales. The scale armor is estimated to weigh 125 to 150 pounds. He carried a spear in his hand with a spare javelin slung on his back. The shaft of the spear was like a weaver's beam, and the head of the spear weighed 15 to 20 pounds. He wouldn't even have to throw it at anyone. He could just drop it on somebody's head and kill them. This was a tough guy. His shield was so large that it took another soldier to carry it before him. Goliath stomped down into the valley of Elah and yelled, "Send your champion down and we will fight this out." He shouted this challenge, quoting verse 9, "If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will become your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall become servants and serve us." And this was called the challenge to single combat and was recognized as a legitimate way to settle military disputes. It's not a bad idea. The next time a war between countries seem inevitable, have the two leaders come out and fight it out, and everyone can stay out of it. Verse 11 says, "When Saul and all of Israel heard the words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid." Verse 16 notes, "And the Philistine came forward morning and evening for 40 days and took his stand. Goliath walked into the valley of Elah twice a day to make this challenge." 40 days he made this challenge, and so that's a total of 80 times, and he was about to make the challenge for the 81st time. It would have been a truly fearful thing to face a 9 1/2 foot giant. In my mind, I always try to imagine what it would have been like, and I try to think of the biggest person I know, and Jared came to mind. It's like if Jared was dressed in full armor fighting somebody like Chet, that's the picture we have here. So get that in your mind. It doesn't seem fair. It seems unbalanced at best, and everyone would be very concerned about Chet's welfare. But we all have giants in our lives, things that loom large in our perspective, and that we have to face, problems we must conquer if we are to go on with our lives. It may be a bully at school or at work, a struggle with an employer, a bad habit, working on a strained relationship, or even overpowering temptation. It may involve people or outside pressures, like GW talked about this morning. But regardless, it results in worries and fears. If you have not yet had to face a giant in your life, I assure you at some point you will. That which is a giant to me may not look like a giant to you, but it's still a giant. And that which is a giant to you may not look like a giant to me, but nevertheless, they are very real. Each of us struggles with his or her own unique challenges. Giants we face every day in our lives, and they are very real. Never make light of someone else's giant. All of us face our giants and challenges that loom large on our horizons, and these problems will make us fearful and even grow weak in the knees sometimes. The question is, how can we defeat the Goliaths of our life? In 1 Samuel 17, we find 7 truths to remember about fighting giants and how those 7 truths can help us be victorious. The first truth is, giants appear when you least expect them. While David was at home in Bethlehem, his 3 older brothers went off to war. They had gone with Saul to battle the Philistines. And it was a custom for the older sons to go while the younger brothers stayed home and did chores. And David, of course, was the baby of the family, the youngest of 10. He was probably still in his teens, maybe not yet 20, Had he been older than that, he probably would have gone to war. We're not told exactly how old he was, but we know whatever his specific age, he was too young to go to war. Most of his time was spent in the fields as a shepherd. Occasionally, he went to Saul's palace to play the harp for the king, we're told in 17:15. But his day-to-day job was to care for sheep. One day, Jesse said to David, "Your brothers have been gone for 40 days now, and I do not know what's happened to them. I want you to go check on them, take these provisions, then bring them back. Bring back news of them." And Bethlehem was only 10, 15 miles away, but the family had not heard word of the three brothers for over a month. So you can see why the father was afraid. The phrase "news of them" in 17:18 in the original means their pledge, from the King James Version there. And this may refer to something tangible David was instructed to bring back to show they were all right. So David arose early in the morning and left the flock with a keeper and took the supplies and went as Jesse had commanded him. Verse 20. As David headed for the valley of Elah, I bet the furthest thing from his mind was fighting a giant. That morning had dawned like any other morning. Knowing what we know about David, he was probably excited to see his brothers, maybe even to see the battle. But there would have been no thought about meeting a giant, much less fighting one. The days when giants appear in your life start out like any other day. You wake up, you go through your routine. Maybe it's a good day, maybe it's a not so good day, but it's like 1,000 other days in your life. Then a note comes in an email, or you get a text, or the phone rings unexpectedly. Someone stops by. Maybe you get called into your boss's office, or you have a checkup at the doctor to take care of something bothersome, but maybe an insignificant medical problem. Or your wife says, "We need to talk." Suddenly there stands a giant. When David reached the valley of Elah, he left the provisions with one of the ones in charge, and then he went to see how his brothers were. As he was talking with them, verse 23 says, "Behold, the champion of the Philistines from Gath, named Goliath, was coming up from the army of the Philistines, and he spoke these same words." These words of Goliath are found in verse 10. "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." Imagine the sarcasm and the power of Goliath's voice. "I've been standing in this spot for 40 days now. This is the 81st time I've made this challenge. Is no one in Israel brave enough to face me?" Verse 23 notes, "And David heard the words Goliath spoke." Being a man of conscience, he could not ignore the fact that this giant had come into his life. And mark it down. Sooner or later, you will have to face your giant. You can face the giants with faith or with fear. This text does a great job of contrasting the fear of the soldiers and the faith of David. Verse 11 notes, "When Saul and all of Israel heard the words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid." Verse 24 says, when all the men of Israel saw the man, they fled from him and were greatly afraid. As David talked with his brothers, the giant came out, hurled his challenge, and David could not believe his ears. "Did you hear what the Philistine said?" And no one answered, because David looked around and he was all alone. Everyone else was 50 feet behind him in a place of safety. When all the men of Israel saw the giant, they fled from him and were greatly afraid. When David went where the troops were cowering, the soldiers were talking about the situation. Since no one had volunteered to fight the giant, Saul had upped the ante and sweetened the deal. He said, "Whoever kills this Philistine, I will make him rich. I will give him my daughter for a wife, and his father's house will be free, and that is free from taxes, free from public service, free from all the government requirements, if they could just step up and kill this giant. Now let's pause to ask the question, of all the soldiers lined up on the Israeli side, who's the logical choice to go and fight the giant? Who was head and shoulders taller than everyone else there and the one closest to the giant's size? It was Saul himself, but Saul was afraid. So he dangled these incentives before his men. I believe these attractive offers zoomed right over the head of David, and David was upset because the name of God had been blasphemed. David was not interested in rewards. Rather, he was concerned about the honor of his God. Note David's words at the end of verse 26. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should taunt the armies of God? All of us need the heart of David. We hear the name of God blasphemed day after day, and sadly, we get used to it. We become hardened, and we think nothing of it. David became angry. They were insulting God. Why doesn't someone do something about it? As giants come into our lives, we can be afraid, or we can meet them with faith in God. We can be overwhelmed by them, or we can see them as an opportunity to glorify the name of God. Choose wisely. When you face giants, someone will always be ready to discourage you. You would think that when there are problems in a person's life, everyone around would be supportive, helpful, strengthening, but that's not always so. Instead, there will always be someone ready to say, you can't do this. You don't have what it takes. You might as well give up. When it came to fighting, even David's father had already said, you're too young. You don't need to be on the battlefield. Jesse sent the oldest boys to join the army, not David. And now David's brothers said, you're too immature. Verse 28, Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when David spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger burned against David, and he said, why have you come down, and with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your insolence and the wickedness of your heart, and you have come down in order to see the battle. Keep in mind who Eliab was. He was the first one who walked in the house when Samuel was there to anoint the next king. Samuel had thought, that's the one. But God let Samuel know, no, that's not the one. I don't see as man sees, and I look at his heart. Then Eliab had to stand and watch as the horn of oil was poured on the head of his youngest brother, and David was anointed king. Jealousy was likely eating up this man. He had insulted David's motives, he insulted David's job, and he insulted David's content of his heart. Now, I know brothers. I'm raising two boys. The natural response of David would have been to get in a fight with his brother when that happens. If David had been like us, he would have probably gotten into a fist fight with his brother. But that didn't happen. That's the way it so often goes when we face giants. Instead of using our energy to fight the giants, we fight people. We are unhappy and out of sorts, so we take it out on those around us, using up energy that should be spent defeating the giants. David, however, refused to be drawn into a misguided battle with his brother. He said, in effect, why are you talking that way? I've done nothing wrong. Then he turned and talked to someone else. He was not going to fight in the camp when there was a giant in the valley below. Somehow David's inquiries came to the ear of Saul, and Saul sent for David. David said to the king, let no man's heart fail on the count of this giant. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine, verse 32. Now Saul tried to discourage David. You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, while he has been a warrior from his youth. Verse 33. In essence, he says, how could you possibly know anything about warfare? You're just a kid who's been taking care of sheep. Conversely, this giant has been training for this moment since he was a boy. No, you're too inexperienced. Everyone tried to discourage David from fighting Goliath. A little later, even the giant himself said, you're too small, you're too weak, you're too ill-equipped, in verse 42 and 43. When you face your giant, you will hear discouraging words. They may be from your family. David was discouraged by his father and his brother. They may be from someone you thought was your friend. Remember, David had played the harp for Saul, and Saul discouraged him from doing what he thought he needed to do. And they may be from someone who does not like you, someone like Goliath. But you can count on it. Those discouraging words will come. Prepare your mind for them, and do not be surprised when people say you can't do it. You must prepare before you meet your giants. If you think, I'll wait till the problem arises and then I'll decide what to do, you will probably end up like Goliath, flat on your back. You must prepare before you meet your giants. David had prepared himself to face Goliath first by facing lions and bears as he took care of sheep. When Saul tried to discourage David, David answered, your servant was tending his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went out after him and attacked him and rescued him from his mouth. And when he rose up against me, I seized him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has taunted the armies of the living God. Verses 34 through 36. David did not prepare for Goliath on the battlefield, but in the back pasture. He did not have to face the lions or the bears. If he had run, no one would have known but the sheep. He did not get a hazard pay bonus for facing fierce creatures. He did not get his picture on the internet as some kind of hero of the moment. He did not even get a thank you from the sheep. Facing lions and bears was a part of his job description as a shepherd, and David did his job, and he was excellent at it. Your preparation to meet life has to come from within. You prepare for the big giants in your life by first facing the little giants. You prepare for major problems not by ignoring the little problems of your life, but facing them squarely and dealing with them with the help of God. David's most important preparation for meeting Goliath was cultivating his relationship with God. As he spoke of killing lions and bears, note whom he gave credit to. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. Verse 37. David believed in God. 1 John 5:4 says, this is the victory that has overcome the world, and talking about our faith. How did a teenager develop a faith in God that the men in Saul's army did not have? He developed his faith the same way his brothers and Saul could have developed theirs, the same way each of us can develop our faith. He meditated on God's word and spent time there. And all the victories that God gave him, those little battles that he won, building up to this moment. Our problem is that we remember what we should forget and forget what we should remember. We easily remember all our failures and forget the victories that God has given us. I always like a good quote, and this is from C.H. Spurgeon. And Spurgeon was a pre-Restoration Baptist preacher, but had a lot of good things to say. He said, "We write our benefits in dust and our injuries in marble. We inscribe our afflictions upon brass, while the records of our deliverances from God are written in water. If instead of dwelling on past defeats, we dwell on how God has continually helped us deal with our problems, we will be ready when the giants barge in uninvited to our lives." Prepare the best you can, and then depend on God. Saul must have been desperate. I can't think of any other reason he would entrust the task of fighting this military giant of a machine to a kid. Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." Verse 37. Isn't it ironic that the king knew the language of faith? He knew the right thing to say, but he didn't walk the right path. If Saul had really believed that the Lord would be with David and give him the victory, Saul would have been on the battlefield himself. We cannot help but be impressed with the confidence of David in comparison to the lack of confidence to all those around him. David had confidence because of at least three things. First, he had confidence because of his training, and this is suggested, like we talked about in verses 38 and 39. But there's a bit of humor in the passage that Saul puts his armor on David. Not sure why Saul wanted David to wear his armor. Maybe Saul hoped to somehow protect David. But if he really wanted to protect him, Saul would have gone out instead of David. Whatever the reason, the armor was put on David with the helmet and the sword and all the other accessories. And the text says he tried to walk. He couldn't even walk with Saul's armor on. Imagine David a size 34 regular and Saul's size 48 long. He couldn't even walk, much less fight. David took the armor off and said in verse 39, "I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them." In other words, he said, "I'm going to stay with what I know." He had confidence in what he could do and what he knew, that which had stood the test of time for him in the past. And what was that? He knew he could whirl a sling and throw a rock with that sling, and he had confidence in his training. This suggests that David also had confidence because of his tools. We're not told that he had his usual shepherd's tools with him, like the rod and the staff. Being on the long journey, not taking care of sheep, he probably didn't have those with him. He had used like the heavy stick to kill lions and bears. However, he didn't have that this time. All he had was his sling in verse 40. You may not be familiar with something. You may be familiar with something similar that a boy might carry around, a slingshot. When I was younger in the woods of East Texas, we made these from forked branches and two strips of rubber that were cut from an inner tube, or even surgical latex that you stole out of your diabetic uncle's house. And you take a tongue boot leather and tie it all together, and you can make a pretty good slingshot. That's not exactly what David had in his hand. David's sling was a leather pouch with a long leather string tied to each side. To use the sling, you'd put the stone in the pouch, hold on to the other two ends, and whirl it around, and then turn loose of one of the strands of leather. It's very difficult to aim. But with this weapon, a man can use projectile speeds up to 100 miles an hour. And that's comparable to like a medieval longbow, which wouldn't be on the scene for another 3,000 years. Amazingly enough, however, Some developed great accuracy with this fickle instrument. Judges 20, verses 15 and 16 tells us the story of 700 left-handed Benjamites. Each of them could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. Kudos to the left-handed Benjamites. David apparently had developed this kind of skill, and he took his sling in his hand and chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, and he put them in the shepherd's bag that he had in his pouch. Verse 40. David headed down the hillside holding his stick in his hand, not a weapon, but his walking staff. And when he came to the brook in the middle of the valley, he chose 5 smooth stones. A couple of things to note. This part of the story has always been impressive to me. First, that he chose them instead of just picking up the first 5 that were handy. He picked up a rock. No, not that one. That one won't do. He tossed it aside. He picked up another. Maybe he'll keep it. And he checked out another rock. Carefully, he picked out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stones that were exactly what he needed. He had his shepherd's bag with him. It might have usually held his lunch, but today it held 5 stones in it, and he was ready for the giant. But also notice how many stones he picked up. It wasn't that the number 5 was super significant. It's that he picked up more than one. He trusted God, yes, no question there, but he was also going into a fight, and in a strategically smart move, thought, I may need more than one shot. He didn't fill up his whole bag, but if the giant didn't go down on the first try, there's something more where that came from. As all eyes from both armies were on this kid standing down in the creek bed, picking up rocks, can you imagine the odds people were giving for this contest? As he walked toward the giant with his 5 smooth stones, where do you think the smart money was? People were against him. The odds were against him, but God was with him. Of course, as David stepped forward with confidence, it was not simply because of his training and his tools, it was primarily because of his trust in God. He depended on his God. Verse 40 and 41 tell us, verse 40 and 41 draw a sharp contrast between the two combatants. His sling was in his hand as he approached the Philistine. Then the Philistine came on and approached David with his shield bearer in front of him. From the west came the great armored champion, his mighty weapons in his bronze helmet shining in the sun. From the east came a small, rosy-cheeked young man in a robe and sandals and a slingshot. When the giant saw David, he was insulted. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was a youth and ruddy, with a handsome appearance. And the Philistine said to David, Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Verses 42 and 43. When Goliath cursed David by his gods, Dagon, Baal, and the rest, there's a whole pantheon there, he made a major mistake. He turned a military encounter into a theological contest. It was going to be God versus gods with a little g. Goliath tried to intimidate David. Come to me and I will give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field. Verse 44. I think this might go down as the first recorded smack talk in sports history. We get intimidated. We get intimidated by the challenges we faced, don't we? Maybe we could face our giants more easily if we could just get our knees to stop knocking together with fear. That play from Goliath would have worked for me. I get terrible anxiety in high-pressure situations. I would have been petrified to face a 9-foot-and-a-half monster that said he was going to give my dead body to animals. Scary things. But instead of terrifying David, Goliath's threat called forth one of the greatest expressions of faith we see in the Bible. It was the verse that was read at the beginning. I'll read it again. Then David said to the Philistine, and I'm paraphrasing, "You come to me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not deliver by sword or spear, but the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands." And that's verses 45 through 47. The battle is the Lord's. If you do not have this passage underlined in your Bible, now's the time. David lived by a simple principle. He had nothing to prove. He had nothing to lose. He was not trying to impress anyone. He was standing up for his God, and he wanted everyone to know that there is a God in heaven and the victory belongs to him. We suggested that you need to prepare yourself for these challenges that life can bring. At some point in your life, you will turn a corner and encounter a giant so huge, so massive, that all your training will seem deficient and your tools inadequate. That's when it's important to remember the battle is the Lord's. In the end, the way to live the confident life is to trust, and trust in God. And we sing the song, "Faith is the victory," but David lived it. If you have a giant, face it at once. Once David picked out his 5 smooth stones, he didn't hesitate. He ran to meet Goliath. Verse 48 and 49 say, "Then it happened when the Philistine rose and came and drew near to meet him, David ran quickly towards the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in a bag and took from it a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine in the forehead, and the stone sank into his forehead so that he fell on his face to the ground. David reached into his bag, felt around for a rock, pulled it out of the pouch, started whirling the sling around his head. The sling whirled and then twang. It zoomed through the air and buried itself into Goliath's forehead as Goliath dropped as though he'd been shot." And this is where most of the kids' stories end. But David was not finished yet. The giant might have only been stunned. Again, David ran. Verse 51. He sprinted towards the fallen body. He had no sword, so he took Goliath's sword. How's that for God providing when there's a need? With what I imagine to be a very swift, adrenaline-filled whack, the grisly task was done. And this dramatic victory teaches us that the ultimate victory is not dependent on the size or the physical prowess of the fighters, but on their relationship with God. Never forget it. This victory teaches us that when you have a giant to fight, don't put it off. Every day you put off facing a challenge, the giant will grow another 3 feet. Every day that passes, it will be harder and harder to solve the problem. Face your giants with God's help and face them at once. And finally, one victory prepares us for another. Sadly, the Philistines did not honor their gentleman's soldiers' agreement to become servants of Israel. But man, did it inspire the Israeli army. Cue the banjo music. One army ran, and one army ran after them. Throughout David's life, one victory prepared him for another. His victories over lions and bears prepared him for this moment, and this victory was preparing him for other victories as he would become king. First of all, David's victory helped the Israelite army. Not only was David's act courageous, It was contagious. I can imagine a scene after David finished off Goliath. He looked up at the Philistine army, and they were standing there with their eyes bugged out and their mouths open. The text says in 51, when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. Then the Israelites who had been so fearful came streaming down the mountainside, and the men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines. Verse 52. David's example encouraged his fellow Israelites. David's victory also encouraged David himself in later battles. Verse 54 says, David took the Philistine's head, brought it to Jerusalem, but he put the weapons in his tent. The head of Goliath ended up in Jerusalem, and that's the last you hear of it. But we continue to see David's character, not an ounce of pride. He didn't need a trophy in the form of Goliath's head. Goliath's weapons, however, David took home with him. I think he was clearly planning ahead. He had been anointed by the prophet. Now this. I can only imagine that the things that might have been running through his mind. Every night when David lay down in his bed, he could look over at the weapons and say, God gave me this victory. The battle is the Lord's. Every morning when he woke up, he could see them and think again, God gave me that victory. The battle is the Lord's. Morning and evening, day and night, he had a reminder that when you stay with God, you have the victory. Every time God gives you a victory, engrave those details on your heart and remember it. God doesn't want to waste a single victory. He says, don't forget it. Nothing will give you more strength in future battles than to remember the success that God's given in the past. So finally, in conclusion, the story of David and Goliath is not merely a tale of a young shepherd defeating a giant. It's a powerful reminder for each of us about the giants we face in our own lives. Just like David, we will encounter challenges that seem unsurmountable, whether they take the form of personal struggles, adversaries, the weight of fear and doubt. It's crucial to remember that these giants often appear unexpectedly, and it's our response that determines the outcome. David's faith in God allowed him to confront Goliath with confidence. His preparation through life's smaller challenges equipped him to rise to the occasion. He teaches us the importance of having faith regardless of our circumstances and looking beyond our immediate fears to recognize the higher purpose at stake. The message echoes through time. We should not shy away from the difficulties, but face them head on, recognizing that true strength comes from our relationship with God. Moreover, as we navigate our lives, we must be vigilant against the discouragement that comes from those around us. Like David, we must stay focused on the task at hand and refuse to let negativity derail us from our higher purpose. Trusting God empowers us to act decisively when we're faced with adversity. Choosing to confront our giants promptly, we can prevent them from growing larger and more looming and more intimidating in our lives. And finally, every victory prepares us for the next, building a foundation of faith and resilience as we witness God's faithfulness in our current struggles. We cultivate a deeper confidence for our future battles. So let us remember, the battle is not ours alone. It belongs to the Lord. When we commit our challenges to Him and stand firm in our faith, we can confront anything that comes our way. Let's carry the lessons of David's encounter into our own lives, facing our giants with bravery, preparation, trust, and an unwavering reliance on God. To face giants, we need God. So we ask the question, is God with you? Are you living that Christian life that fully places God at the center of all your battles and all your victories? If not, decide tonight to make that change and become a part of His church by being baptized in His name. Or if you just simply need the prayers of this congregation, if we can help in any way, please come while we stand and sing.